question. We probably have time for just 2 more questions. We have quite a few here that I've reserved that are also about energy development. So I'm going to go with the question in a broad way that could approach both the executive and the legislative branch. And it has to do, I'm combining questions here now, with the balancing of what landowners in Wyoming want, which is often contradictory with regard to transmission lines location and pipeline location, and what the public wants, which is often protection of open spaces. But of course, the public is not the owner of those open spaces. And so the question is, what can the legislature or the executive branch do to balance and to help everyone feel comfortable? That may be an impossible question, but I am parsing it to you, and we'll begin with Ms. Peterson.
It seems to me, Leslie Peterson, forget to name myself, but by now I think you've got us pretty well figured out, I hope. I think this question bears particularly on wind energy, because that's where we're seeing the greatest amount of discussion on the questions that Judy just raised. Like everyone else, I'm awaiting the work of the wind task force that was set up by the legislature. And I've had the pleasure of talking with Michael Van Flatiron, who's on that committee, yesterday in Gillette, and catching up on it. The legislature's already taken some great steps. They made a huge philosophical decision, and the governor supported it as well, that wind energy should be taxed, and that they should have quite a long period of time at the end of 2011 before it even kicked in. But the remaining, and the tax money, 60% of it will go to the counties for impact mitigation. But the most important unresolved issue is the issue of the siting of the large transmission lines and also the connector lines. And the use of eminent domain. There's a 1-year moratorium on eminent domain so that people are not going to be condemned for a connector line for wind energy. But it's going to be very difficult to work that out. And when there's a whole group of landowners who want a wind project and only a few who are holdouts, how will that be worked out? And the Wind Energy Task Force is spending a huge amount of time working on it. I look forward to their results, and I don't have the answers to this difficult question right now.
Mr. Euban?
Tom Euban, Republican for governor. With the eminent domain problem and the placement of transmission lines and different things like that, I think that the companies that want to put the lines in should have to negotiate with the landowners. And the government should be off to the side. But I know they do have one part of the law on eminent domain that I think there's 3 parts of the government that can say, we're going to go ahead and take it. Without any overview or anything, they can go ahead and take the land. That's one part of the law that needs to be taken out. We need to keep the eminent domain, which is in the Constitution, Wyoming Constitution, where they'll be duly compensated for any land that's taken from them. But I think that the landowners should have the right to negotiate the best price they can get for their land. Thank you.
Let's go back to Mr. Counselor.
Pete Gosar, Democratic candidate for governor. Essentially, I think this comes to a private rights versus property rights. And it is a tangled mess. I was a big proponent of the moratorium for the wind energy. I had the pleasure, I guess, of flying the governor around. I do that as my day job, I guess. And we went and looked at the Commissary Ridge and that transmission line. And not 30 miles south of that transmission line was already an established transmission line. And you could understand the people in Kemmer, the Commissary Ridge, they're heartburn over this one. Why would you go and make Wyoming look like a spaghetti with transmission lines, with a bowl of spaghetti, when you just had a transmission corridor 30 miles to the south? So I think there's common sense that has to come to play. Part of the moratorium was a discussion of eminent domain and getting more people to sign on. I think those people that have the turbines, they benefit the most. But those transmission lines cross through people that may not see the financial benefit. But it still devalues their land, still takes away from their viewshed. And so I think that there's an opportunity here to talk and say, you know what, the best and most lasting solutions have the most people involved. And so I think the eminent domain discussion is primary to this discussion, and I support that moratorium completely. It is a discussion that needs to be had, and I think that in time, if you get an 85 or 90%, you'll get a solution. Thank you.
Rita Meyer, Republican candidate for governor. Every day of a governor's life is spent in balancing between personal property rights, the bigger needs of all the citizens, between a coal-fired plant and emissions, between the production of coal bed methane and water discharge. These are the kinds of things that constantly are on a governor's desk. While personal property rights are very important to the people of Wyoming, and protecting those rights is critical. And a governor takes a lead role in doing that, whether it's with regards to wind energy and the transmission lines, or the stand-up uranium sites, whatever it is. Personal property rights are very, very important. With regards to wind energy, and that is the flavor of the day, the new flavor here in Wyoming, a lot of folks don't seem to understand that when you stand up those turbines, you've got to have wire too. And that is the crux of the matter right now across Wyoming, because you might not really like the look of those big, tall wind turbines, but people like less like the transmission lines, those quarters. But I'm here to say the federal government needs to share the burden in terms of building out those transmission lines on their lands, our lands, federal lands, state lands, and private property lands. That should not all fall on the shoulders of the private property owner.
Mr. Heath, did you have a chance on that?
I didn't.
You did.
I'm feeling left out.
Thank you, Matt Mead, Republican candidate for governor. It is a tough question. There's no question about it. Here's what I think. Number one is we need eminent domain law in Wyoming, which we have. Number two, I think the legislature, the work they're doing on eminent domain law is appropriate now, because as it stands, in my view, it is too one-sided. That is, as a landowner, while you say you're negotiating and that it's all fair and that 80 or 90% of the agreements with landowners are consensual, that's because eminent domain is such a heavy hand now. And once it gets into court, the court has limited jurisdiction to make decisions regarding surface agreements, liability concerns, and so I really appreciate the work of the legislature right now. My wife and I have a ranch in southern Albany County, and we've got the king-size transmission lines going right through the heart of our ranch. And so I understand very well what it means to have transmission lines on your property. There's going to be, it's a great challenge for Wyoming. We're going to need the transmission lines, but to the extent we can put pressure on the federal government and the regulatory agency called FERC to make those corridors as small as possible, that is going to be the key. Because as Pete said, it just doesn't make sense to have one here and 30 miles away another one. We need to, as a state, be as proactive as possible, saying we want the corridors to make sense for Wyoming. We want them as small as possible. We recognize the need for them, both in terms of wind energy and other energy sources, but we are not going to have a haphazard plan. We're not going to be, as Pete said, a plate of spaghetti. And that is Wyoming's challenge for now and for years to come on this transmission and collector line issue.